Hey, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be answering your questions. So this is going to be a slightly different video, hopefully a little bit more conversational. Oftentimes on Instagram, I'll do quick Q&As on Instagram stories, and those are a lot of fun, but they only give you so much time to really answer the question. So a few days ago, I asked my followers on Instagram to ask me some questions so that I can make a video like this, and that's what we're doing in today's video. If you're new to my channel and this is your first video of mine, welcome. I appreciate you watching. My name is Thomas Patilli. I'm a professional illustrator, comic book artist, drawer, visual storyteller. I don't have an official title, but I do this whole art thing full time. And along the way, I've learned a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes. And in a video like this, I'm hoping to offer some of my experience and whatever knowledge I might have to better answer your questions. And I hope you find some value out of it. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Okay, so the first question is, how do you get to working in the comic industry? It's a good question. It's a question I get often enough, actually. And I think it's because I draw a lot of comic-related stuff. I've also worked on several comic and graphic novel projects for various comic book publishers. At the moment, I'm not working on any comic project with a publisher. I'm putting my energy into creating my own comic project that I will eventually write and draw. I'm very excited about that, but it's a conversation for another time, perhaps another question down the line too, we'll see. But like I said, this is a question that I get often enough in different variations. Looking at your question a little bit more deeply, it looks like you say, how do I get to working in the comic industry? Which to me implies that you're looking to be hired by a publisher to either draw or write comics, which is great. It's just, I wanted to make the distinction between, sometimes I get questions of how do I make a comic, or how do I sell a comic, or how do I self-publish a comic? This question indicates to me that your head might not be in that area, and it's a little bit more in the getting hired to make comics area. I could be wrong, but that's just how I'm interpreting the question. If that's the case, I think it's a bit of a different world now in terms of the landscape of comics and the comic industry as a whole. Side note, comic industry to me is much more of like the comic wild, wild west as it is a comic industry. It's certainly not that organized at all. And I think from an outsider's perspective, it might seem like this monolith, like you're outside of it and you need to kind of break into it. But I don't think it really is that simple or black and white. At one point or another, there were bigger publishers that kind of ran the majority of the comic industry. And if you could get to working for one or both of those publishers, you would solidify a pretty consistent career in comics. Whereas now, there's many publishers, and there's also this whole like crowdfunding aspect to the comic industry. So the industry as a whole has really fragmented and spread out in a way that's very, very different than it was decades ago. This is a much harder time to get hired into comics, but it's an easier time, or I'd say maybe not easier, but a more feasible time to make your own comics. I know that approach isn't for everybody. A lot of us as creators want to just get hired to draw the thing or to write the thing. You know, you don't necessarily want to deal with how to work with a printer or how to distribute comics or how to promote your stuff or how to, you know, balance your books and different things like that that are more in line with the business side of things. I totally get that. But I think if you just solely want to be a creator that gets paid to draw something or write something, I think there's less and less of an opportunity to do that, especially if you're brand new and you don't necessarily have an audience to bring to the table. So it's not to say that it's not going to happen or it doesn't happen. It just means that you almost have to go about your promotion to these companies and to these editors in a similar, if not the same way as an artist who is trying to create their own comic to sell. Meaning that as artists today, as all creative people really, if you're an actor, a singer, a director, a composer, a writer, whomever, we're all almost like small businesses onto ourselves. You have to be your own management team, your own agent. I think being entrepreneurial and business-minded really helps creative people nowadays, just because the landscape has changed so much. You know, people say that in the creative arenas nowadays, whether it's in comics or movies or music, that there's less gatekeepers and the power is all in the hands of the creators, which is true in a lot of ways, but that's good and bad. With great power, as Uncle Ben says, comes great responsibility. And I think a lot of creative people, we don't always want all that responsibility. So some of us would rather sometimes just get hired to do the thing. And then we could put all our energy into that particular project. But at the same time, if you want a long-lasting career in comics or in any creative endeavor, you have to think beyond that in many ways, because I think less of that exists than ever before. Because the industry is changing so much, the job of a freelancer might not be there in a few years' time, because there might not be big enough companies to hire enough freelancers or any freelancers. So what's already happening is that a lot of the freelancers are just becoming business owners, making our own stuff. It's a lot harder and a little bit more of a headache, but one of the baskets that I'm taking a lot of my eggs out of is the trying to get hired basket, because I think there's a lot less hiring to be done, and I don't necessarily see that changing anytime soon. So if I want to continue working in comics and in illustration, it's, I feel, up to me to create more of the opportunity, create more of the work, and figure out ways of putting it out there. So whether you're trying to get hired by a company to draw comics, or you're going to take it into your own hands and make your own comic, I think the same fundamentals still apply. And for me, the two main things are your work has to be really good and you have to be super, super consistent. Without those things, either approach is going to be hard to really work out. So personally, I sort of came into comics in a roundabout kind of way. I always wanted to be a comic book artist ever since I was a kid. But then by the time I got to like my late teens, early 20s, I realized just how tedious it was, and I didn't want to do that for a living anymore. So I veered more into just being an illustrator. And then I became an illustrator and was working professionally for several years until I came back around into comics. An editor hired me to work on a small project. I had known him because we went to art school together. And then one little cover project led to another cover project, which led to some interior work, and then so on and so on. And it just sort of built up from there. Obviously, the thing that got my foot in the door was that I knew this one particular editor because we went to school together. But I think more than that, it was because I was already a professional artist. Although I wasn't working specifically in comics, I was working as an illustrator, and I had a real like comic book aesthetic, just because that's like what I love. I love comic art, and I've always been inspired by comic artists. So my aesthetic was very much comic art. And I was already a professional who was used to working with clients, meeting my deadlines, getting my work printed. So not only was it an easier transition for me because I was coming from a similar field, but it was also easy for the editors to trust me because they knew that I had already been doing something very similar professionally already. So I don't know if you are someone who already works professionally in another creative field. If so, I would leverage that as much as possible. The main thing that editors really want to know beyond how good you can draw is how reliable you are. And if you've already proven yourself to be professional and reliable and consistent in another field, it's that much easier for them to take a chance on you in comics. If you're not already a professional in another field, then presenting yourself as a professional, whether it be the way you send emails, the way you meet with an editor in person, the way you present your work on social media, all that stuff, if you could do all of that in as professional a way as possible, I think it's really going to give you that edge. So although the landscape is changing in so many ways, the tried and true fundamentals of professionalism and consistency, I think, still goes a really long way. So I know I'm kind of answering this question in a little bit of an indirect way, but that's only because I don't have direct experience with showing my work to an editor at a convention or going to the Marvel offices and opening up my portfolio and then getting work from that. If I did, I would tell you to do that, but I can only speak from my personal direct experience. And hopefully this offers you some insight that you might not get elsewhere. I wish there was just one simple route that I could recommend. Do this, then do this, and then do this, and you'll be working in comics. But unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. So stay focused, stay consistent, and good luck with everything. I hope it all works out. Thanks for the question. Okay, next question is, how many years of practice did it take you to get the art style you have now? I'll say this, you might have heard this advice before, because I know I've heard it a lot, which is a lot of artists would always tell younger artists and students not to focus on style that much, because it's more effective to focus on your skills, becoming better as an artist, becoming better at communicating your ideas with your art. And I think that always, to me, sounded like noble, wise advice. And I kind of wanted to believe it theoretically, but I never really put it into practice because I was always very focused on my style. And I think for good reason, because I was trying to separate myself from other artists. I was trying to appeal to a certain audience and a certain clientele. I think I had very legitimate reasons to be focused on my style, but it wasn't until like only a few years ago where kind of just naturally I stopped focusing on style. I don't know why. I didn't make like a conscious decision to stop focusing on style, but I really just put more emphasis on doing the things that those artists in their advice were saying, which was focusing more on my communication, more on my skills, trying to just get better at drawing, better at inking, trying new things like painting, get better at coloring, all that kind of stuff. In doing that, along with incorporating a more regular sketchbook practice, I feel like I kind of stopped thinking about style just sort of naturally. And it's interesting because ever since I've done that, I have noticed a real progression in my work. So if you're looking for your style to kind of come together and to define itself, then I think by almost thinking less about it, that will happen faster. Okay, so this is a quick programming note. My microphone died. I realized too late, and it got cut off. And a few a few questions that I answered also got lost because the microphone wasn't on. So just to reiterate what I was saying, style, think less about it. It'll happen more. It's kind of one of those weird riddles in life, but it's true. I feel like my style isn't done evolving. I hope not. I'm still evolving as an artist. My style is still evolving. Where I'm at now, style-wise, art-wise, is just a cumulative effect of all the years that I've been at this, which is really just my whole life of drawing. So 5 years from now, I'll be that much more of a different artist. So I look at style as much more of a cumulative thing. I hope that makes some sense. I hope that answers your question and maybe gives you a different way of looking at the whole thing. So thank you for that question. That's a really great one. Okay, the next question. This is a complicated one. Should I go to art school? Oh boy, I got a lot to say on art school. I've said it before in little short Q&As before on Instagram, but I guess I'll get into it a little bit deeper here. I went to art school, full disclosure. I loved my experience there. I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City. I met a lot of really great people. I studied with a lot of really great instructors. When I went to art school, it was the year 2003. I had a flip phone in my pocket. I actually got my first cell phone when I started college because everybody had a flip phone. There were no smartphones. There was no YouTube. There was certainly no Facebook. There was obviously no Instagram because of that. So a lot of the outlets that we have today in terms of learning, sharing your art, seeing other people's art, seeing other people's process, that stuff wasn't really there. So the draw for me, as far as art school went, was, wow, I get access to all these people and all this knowledge and all this equipment. And I could finally ask a comic book artist how they do what they do, and an illustrator how they do what they do, and all that kind of stuff. Because outside of books and workshops, that information wasn't nearly as readily available as it is today. So back then, the draw of art school was still pretty strong, and they could certainly make the case that you needed to pay as much money as it cost to go there. So it made a lot of sense for me to go to art school because that was the thing that was going to get me to the next level. It was almost like going to Acme University or Xavier's School for Gifted Kids or whatever it's called. It's a place where I could like hone in on my superpowers and my talents. And I took a lot of student loans out in order to pay for it because art school is not cheap, but I justified it in my head and it made a lot of sense at the time. The reason why I say that and I try to put it into perspective timeline wise is because nowadays I would say 90%, if not more, of what I learned and what I was exposed to in art school is out there, like here on YouTube or on other platforms where you can maybe pay a little bit of money to get some sort of instruction. It's out there and it's a fraction of the cost, if not completely free. So for me, I can't really justify nowadays going to art school when so much of that information is online. Now, that's not to say that there's not like this tangible sort of experience that you have when someone in real life is perhaps demonstrating how to do something in front of you, your other classmates, you're kind of feeding off of each other, you're asking each other questions, you're becoming friends with people. That stuff is fantastic, and you can't find that online. You really do need to be in person in certain things to really get the most out of something. But my question to you would be, is the full price of tuition nowadays for art school, which is just extraordinarily high, is it worth just that? Like the connections you might make with other classmates, watching a demonstration? Is it worth the price tag, or is it better to maybe take like a 1 month or 1 week or 3 day workshop somewhere where there's a famous artist or an expert in their field teaching you how to paint, draw, gouache, oil, watercolor, whatever it might be, for a fraction of the price? Yeah, you get the in-person experience in the workshops too. You get to pick someone's brain. You get to be around other artists, which I think is invaluable. But it certainly won't cost you as much as even 1 semester of art school. So for me, it really does come down to a financial kind of a decision. If you get a full scholarship, I say go and enjoy it, have fun, get the most out of art school as you possibly can. If you are very, very wealthy or have a rich uncle or something like that who's willing to pay for your art school experience out of pocket and leaves you with no loans or anything like that, then sure, go for it. But for everyone else, I would say really think about alternatives to art education. So that's how I feel about art school. There's pros, there's cons. If you're an art school instructor and you're watching this, I don't mean this as a knock on your employer or what you do. I was an art school instructor myself as well. I think there's a lot of very well-intentioned people, and there's a lot of really great instructors doing great things at art schools everywhere. I think, though, the whole idea of art school with the price tag attached to it is absurd and insane to me. So we're not operating on brains. We're not building rockets. We're making art. It's not one of these professions that guarantees that you're going to have an income stream right out the bat that's going to justify the amount of money you spent on your education. I've been an artist, a professional artist, for many, many years at this point. No one ever asked me where I went to school, proof of diploma, nothing. Your art and your professionalism and the way you conduct your own business, that's what speaks for itself. No one cares about what art school you went to. If you think that perhaps by going to art school, you're putting yourself in a better position to be successful as an artist, that's a valid thought to have, especially as a young person, because if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be a lawyer, or if you want to be a teacher, you go to school to do those things. But being a professional artist is very, very different. And to follow that same kind of protocol and apply it to art is unrealistic. And I do think that the powers that be behind art school know that and sort of do it anyway. And to me, I find that that's very dishonest. And I don't feel comfortable recommending that structure to someone who is going to embark on a career in art. So the short answer, should I go to art school? If I were you, I wouldn't, but that's just my answer. Let me know what you think in the comments. Perhaps you have a completely different opinion about this whole art school thing. I'd love to hear it. Did you go to art school? Are you currently enrolled in an art school? I'd love to know in the comments below. Thanks so much for this question. I'm glad I got to address it here in a little bit more of a in-depth kind of way that I haven't really been able to address on more of the shorter platforms. So great question. This is a great question. Do you have any long-term goals as an illustrator? Book, legacy? I have a lot of long-term goals. I have a lot of just goals in general as far as illustrating and making comics and drawing and doing all that stuff is concerned. It seems like the life of an artist is just very, very short. There never seems to be enough time to match the amount of ideas and ambition that I think creative people have inside of them. So yeah, as far as like a long-term goal for me, I think for me, having a book, some sort of something that I could point to say, this is a collection of me. This is something that I either wrote and drew, and so it takes the form of like a graphic novel, or this is a collection of my art, or this is a instructional book, or whatever it might be. I do love the idea of having some sort of book project that encompasses a big part of my creativity and my thinking and my thoughts. I would like to have several of these books, but I also know how much goes into making just one book. I've been involved in making several graphic novels. I've only been the artist on all of them. I haven't written them. I didn't self-publish them. I was just the artist. And even that is a really big endeavor that takes a lot of time. So I know that this is a really big endeavor, but one of my long-term goals is definitely to put together some form of a book, if not several, that I could be very, very happy to share, and sort of something that I can point to as something that really just kind of encompasses who I am as an artist and a creative person. Legacy, though, that's a big one. I have no idea. Something I really never think about. Maybe I should, I don't know. But I try not to think too much of what might be thought of me after the fact. That's probably for the better. Speaking of books, this is a great one. What is your writing process for your original comic? How appropriate. Great segue. I mentioned earlier in this video that I'm working on my own creator-owned comic project that I'm both writing and drawing. It did get a false start at a certain point a few years ago. I was self-publishing it on my Patreon, but it was started too early and I didn't have everything together and it sort of just fell apart pretty quickly. So since then, I've been picking up the pieces and remaking it to make it stronger and better and hopefully get it to a point where I can start sharing it regularly on Patreon and perhaps in other ways sooner than later. But as far as my writing process for this comic is concerned, that's a great question because that's been the biggest challenge of this whole thing. Obviously, the art always presents challenges, but I'm an artist and I feel like I'm always up for those challenges. And one way or another, I always kind of figure it out. But with writing is this whole other world. And although I'm a creative person, I may have ideas. It's the structural stuff. That's where I get stuck just because I don't have the chops. I don't have the skills. I don't have the full education behind writing. So for the last like 2-3 years, I've really just been like a student of trying to understand story structure, writing, trying to see how other people take a big idea and break it up into acts and make it digestible and interesting. So my writing process really comes down to just like vomiting on a page with words and then looking at it like a week, 2 weeks, sometimes even a month later with fresh eyes. With those fresh eyes, I'm then able to see things that I didn't see when I was first vomiting on that page, and then restructure things almost as though I'm a different writer or an editor. So one of the things that I have now that I'm using to my benefit is I don't have a specific deadline. I don't have a publisher. I don't have any particular expectation for this project, which means that I have time. I have so much time to work on this thing. It's one of the reasons why it's been taking so much time, but I'm trying to utilize that time by spacing out the amount of time in between different writing sessions. Because every time I come back to it after a little bit of time spent in between, I see new things. I have more knowledge behind story and story structure. I also think that I understand the characters more because I'm not rushing it. I'm not forcing it. The characters are very, very slowly but naturally coming to life. As far as process for writing goes, I'm brand new. I don't really know what I'm doing all that much, but I enjoy that experience too, because I'm not caught up in what I technically should be doing or knowing too much. It's the things that you don't know sometimes that allow you to be creative. So I am enjoying that, although at times it could be frustrating because sometimes things just seem too chaotic and I would like a little bit of structure. There's one book called Save the Cat. I read it and listened to it actually on Audible like several times in the last like 3 or 4 years. It's really, really good. There's another book. Oh man, it's by Saul. Let me look it up. Saul. Yeah, there's this book. It's called Stein on Writing, and it's by, I think his name is Saul Stein, and it's really great. He was a writer or is a writer. I don't know, and also an editor. And so he comes at it from both perspectives, both the writer's perspective and the editor's perspective. And his approach is very much about precision. It's also geared towards like writing novels. And even though I'm not writing novels, story is story. And then you kind of just change the format for whatever it is that you're working on. But there's been a few other books that I'm blanking on right now. I'll try to include them here if they dawn on me while I'm editing this. But if you have any book suggestions about how to become a better writer, write stories, whether it's specifically for comics or for books or movies or TV, whatever it might be, leave them in the comments. Let me know. I could definitely use all the help I could get. Okay, so as you might be seeing here, the light is changing quite a bit, and that's because I've been recording this video for way too long. I actually had to re-record so much of this because of the microphone complications. So I gotta go. I think I'm gonna lose my voice. But I do want to answer more of these questions because there are several more to get to, and perhaps in a part 2. So let me know how you like this video. Please, if you would like to see a part 2, let me know. I'll totally make it. If there's not really like an audience for it or a desire to see more of me answering these questions, then I won't bother. But please do let me know in the comments. That's the beauty about this whole kind of thing where we could communicate with each other in the comment section, and I could get a feel of what you guys want to see more of or not at all. So that helps big time. Also, if you do want to see more of these Q&A videos, leave any questions you might have in the comments. I'll include those in a part 2 if there is one. I hope you got some value out of this. If you did, smash that like button, as they say. If you would like to see more of my videos and you're new here, please do subscribe. You might find some cool stuff that I've made over the course of the years. I got a bunch of videos up at this point, so feel free to browse and check out my whole catalog. As always, there'll be links and all that other kind of fun stuff in the description. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.